Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Vedic religion. Why should it be only here? The question arises as follows. Are there no other countries with their own religions? In those religions, they have not allotted work based on heredity and created so many castes. Why should we be the only one to be doing so? Even in countries where such division of people into castes has not been done, there are people involved in various duties such as looking after scriptures, waging wars, looking after agriculture, trade and commerce, and so on. I will ask a counter question. Even if we were to look at this dispassionately, can these countries or inspiring culture and civilization be ever matched? In other countries, great civilizations have sprung up in the past, but none of them have shown the longevity that ours has for so many thousands of years. I am not trying to boast. From the time of Alexander the Great, even when we have touched the bottom line as of now, foreigners say Indian civilization. Oh, what a great one it has always been. What is the reason for this? There have been great Mahatmas, Gyanis, devotees, saints, and philanthropists in other countries too. By whatever calculations, still, for many thousands of generations, there has been a continuous stream of great philosophers, sadhus, and jnanis here in India that cannot be matched ever anywhere else. Even if we total up all the greats of the world and compare with ours, the tally will still be in our favor. I am not saying that this is a country of saints. I do not have to say that either. It is the outsiders that are holding this country's reputation high. They virtually dance this country's praise by wondering for anybody ready to hear, oh, what great philosophy, what great concepts, and feel proud of paying encomiums of praise to its religion and saints. Art, sculpture, music, literature, mathematics, astrology, and so on. In all these fields and more, the whole world is full of praise to the high pinnacles of glory achieved by Indian thinkers. The world praises sky high works such as Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Shakuntalam, and a whole series of such books. The books in Tamil, Tevaram, Divya Prabandham are held the foremost in devotional literature. Tirukural evokes heartfelt admiration that there can be no other book of comparable clarity and brevity on practical behavioral exactness. What temples, what architectures, what inspiring spires, what beautiful divine statues and idols, what wonderful Carnatic classical music, what dance forms, Bharatanatyam, Kuchipudi, Odissi, oh God, foreigners have not words enough to praise things beyond praise. On their own, leaving their households, they come here to know, to learn, to find a meaning for life. The Britishers who enslaved us and kept us under control employed a whole army of intellectuals to study Indian systems and traditions to identify ways and means for their strategy of divide and rule. The schemes and wedges that they created and expanded in the 19th century are still pestering sores in the Indian body politic continued to be exploited by ever new generations of politicians. But some of those intellectuals ended up becoming fans of Indian systems and traditions. They have open admiration for our culture and civilization that they have translated all our shastras, prayer songs, and classic literature into English. What was the speciality of this culture, civilization, and society? What was peculiar about our society not existing elsewhere? The answer is Varna Ashrama Dharma. This Varna Ashrama Dharma, which is considered by its critics as the cause for all the ills of our society, is actually the reason why this country is the foremost in philosophy, people's attitude and behavior, arts and crafts, and knowledge. Unless there is stability in the society with the consequent environment of peacefulness of mind and life, there cannot be cultural wealth and tradition. There could not have been an abundance of artistic talent. We can affirm with confidence that in other countries, those religions could neither create such an environment nor did they pay attention to sociological foundation. There were general directions such as don't steal, don't do prostitution, be truthful, and so on. But there have never been comprehensive rules for the society as a whole. The priests in churches and the bhikkhus in viharas had their codes of conduct. Yes, but that's about all. I feel that they did not pay attention to the need for discipline in the various strata of society. So, what happened? Despite having some development in various fields, competition and one upmanship have always been there. There was never the clarity that this is my job and so let me do this as a duty to the best of my ability. Instead, everyone went for any and every job. Here, you were born into a job. You didn't think of aspirations or livelihood or bother about competition. There was a carefree and intense involvement in the work. There was unquestionable mutual amiability and peace. Competition can lead to better performance, but it can lead to cutthroatism too. Competition can never lead to the sort of excellence in achievement that can derive only out of total concentration in the job at hand, uncaring for appreciation or criticism. Because of this, this country has been the spring of excellence in various fields. The superior quality of life led to evolving of superior human beings of divine levels who automatically set very high standards to emulate. In other countries, because of the lack of stability, they remained at the level of competitiveness only. If we were to believe the social reformers' view that the majority of the populace was kept under strict control under Varna Dharma, we should have had many social revolutions. But this word revolution itself is unheard of in this country, except for the wheels of carts, chariots, and time revolving. Only after reading about the French, American, and Russian revolutions in the history books, people of this country could have become aware of the fact that a whole population of a country could be involved in such mutual conflict. When we read the history further, we note that revolutions have a tendency to be preceded and followed by revolutions. None of them achieved anything permanently. That means that dissatisfaction, disaffection, and disgruntlement have been the people's lot in those countries. Today's condition in the world is still worse. Everywhere there is indiscipline, chaos, wars, conflicts. Daily a government is toppled. Only in countries where there is some form of autocracy, where the government itself is ruling over the population with an iron hand, there seems to be no revolution. But even in such places, the stability is only transient. Even in Russia, The so called Iron Curtain, I am told that it is like a smoldering volcano which may go off any day. Once in a while, a writer or thinker escapes or personal risk to life and talk about the extreme brutal and inhuman conditions existing there. Evidently, the reference is to books by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, such as Gulag Archipelago. There is no satisfaction to people there either. India has never been under such rule. Slaves could not have produced the art and culture of India. Neither have we ever cried or complained to people of other nations. Unless there was freedom of thought, expression, and action under peaceful conditions, such an abundance of art, literature, craft, and most importantly, philosophy could not have evolved in India. To say that the majority was controlled by the whims and fancies of priestcraft through superstition in a blatant untruth. You could say that possibly about some of the witch doctors of tribes in the deep forest of South Africa, where the priest also had judicial and executive powers. It was not so in India. All castes here had knowledge, devotion to God, and were well advanced in spiritual matters. Great saints evolved out of every caste. If we read the Puranas, Periya Puranam and Bhakta Vijayam, we will note that sainthood was not the personal prerogative of Brahmins. Kings such as Chandragupta Maurya and Shivaji, ministers such as secular majority of Nayanamars and Alvars were from the fourth Varna, who were venerated by installing their idols in temples. Here, the priestcraft did not have the judicial or executive powers. In fact, the so called priestcraft, that is, the Brahmin, was supposed to be the most humble and meek. If anything goes wrong, he is required to punish himself as per the Shastras. When there was untouchability in USA, if the Negro happened to touch a white, the Negro had to undergo punishment. But here, if the untouchable came in contact with the Brahmin was required to take a bath and do some rituals of repentance. The point I want to make here is that even when untouchability was widely prevalent, it was mostly mutually accepted and not forced by fear or law or under compulsion. The biggest and longest civilized society could not have been held under duress or duplicity. In reality, since all people found mutual practical benefit, the system was not objectionable and hence did not lead to an upheaval. You just kept your distance from each other as matter of convenience. Now, let us ignore the fact that the society progressed to awesome heights of glory in all walks of life under Varna Dharma without a revolution or social upheaval. Breaking through this old arrangement of Varna Dharma, ever since we started the so called process of progress and advancement in this country, if we take stock of the state of affairs, we note that there is more indiscipline, lies, scams, bribery, nepotism, favoritism, prostitution, and so on after we started the process of doing away with Varna Dharma. Everywhere there is dissatisfaction, complaints, accusations, demonstrations, strikes, quelling of riots by police and curfew. In many areas, our performance leaves much to be desired. From a state of being great in the world opinion, we are being looked down upon. If a small country like Pakistan could go to war with us, what does it mean? It is an indication of the erosion of the nation's Atmabalam or self power. Why has it dwindled? What have we done or undone to deserve this weakness? What has nourished us and enabled the growth of our culture for thousands of years? What have we given up that today we are ashamed of calling ourselves heirs to that glorious past? A deep analyst will reveal that till the Varna Dharma, not available to any other nation, was fully ingrained in our culture, our civilization was like a solid rock invoking the awesome admiration of the world. And ever since its erosion, we are seeing the downward trend. The answer for the question, why should the Varna Dharma be here, is let at least this nation and its culture be left without being interfered with, being capable and suitable for self analysis, that is Atma Chintanai, for divine experience, for arts, for noble thoughts, and lofty idealism. For the question, why should it be here only? The answer is so that it is at least here. The alternative is only competition, immediately followed by jealousy, dissatisfaction, social conflicts only. Everyone will only aspire for higher and higher education and goody goody jobs only. But everybody cannot get that. That has to result in hatred, differences, and disparities of means and ends. We can see even now that when unemployment among educated youth is on the increase, there is a call to control admission into colleges. Everyone cannot be fitted for all jobs. Some control has to be there. When the control was in Varna Dharma, we left the control in nature and thereby in God. We believed in traditional continuity of work, hereditarily entrusted. There was intrinsic loyalty and ingrained capability and efficiency. When money is the only driving force, perfection in work is not aimed at. Marketing becomes more important than quality of work. There can be no civilization without satisfaction of needs for all. The Varna Dharmam was and is a unique arrangement which provided satisfaction to all parts of the society and hence should not be found fault with. I do not know if it can be brought back in its entirety. Whether we try to bring it back or give it up as impossible as a final point, I have to say that it was an arrangement that benefited all the classes of the society, thereby all the people of this country, and through them enabled the quality of life in the whole of Indian subcontinent and in the bargain in the world for thousands of years. The least we can do is not to ridicule it or look down upon it or find fault with it or be ashamed of it. To do so is tantamount to committing a sin. Who is responsible and what is the remedy? I raised a question as to who is responsible or irresponsible enough to be the reason for the present state of affairs, wherein the moment you take the name of caste, everybody looks at you as though you have committed a monumental blunder and put your foot in your mouth. Who has to take the blame for breakdown of an arrangement that was immensely beneficial to all? I will give you the answer for it. It is the Brahmin. Brahmin is responsible for the wrong impressions about Varna Dharma. It is the Brahmin who is squarely to be blamed for usurping and thereby destroying the Varna Dharma that was ennobling and benefiting the individual, the nation, and the world. The Brahmin failed in his duty of learning the Vedas and failed to carry out his daily and periodic devotional rituals. Then he left his abode. He abandoned his village and came to the city. He gave up his outer symbolic attire too. He cropped his hair, wore the suit instead of Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, and scriptures. He took to the Westerners' worldly education. He literally fell for the bobbyism of clerical jobs. He copied the white man in style, dress, and attitudes. He forfeited his hoary hereditary tradition into thin hair and fell for the lucre gave into bodily sensory gratification, went in for Western education here and then in England, adopted the white man's way of life of revelry and indulgence, like the fish which swallowed the bait line and sinker. As per the Shastras, he was not to have greed for money and was not to accumulate wealth till he lived the life as required by the Shastras and was generating an atmosphere of divine vibrations through chanting of Veda mantras, doing yaga and yajna oblations. All the people of other castes treated him with love and respect. They looked up to him as a friend, guide, and philosopher. Now, having left his profession, village, and characteristic lifestyle, when he behaved as though he has suddenly attained to some eminence, people of other castes took note, since they always took him as the ideal to emulate for all good reasons. Now they followed suit in his aberrant behavior too. They also abandoned the village life and their professions and opted for town life, Western education, and government jobs. Since for generations the Brahmin community has been involved in work requiring brain power, and all his energy had been utilized for the welfare of the society instead of solely himself. By this attitude itself, his thinking faculty was like a bright and sharp knife edge. But now, with selfish motivation, he should have lost his natural sharpness. His natural sharpness of intelligence was a God's gift to enable him to do his duty. Now, when he left his duties, his intelligence had to drop. Still, like a bicycle which keeps moving even after the pedaling had stopped, even after the Brahmin had stopped performing his duties, some pedal power of his forefathers had applied for generations remained in reserve. He still had brain enough to excel in whatever he did. He did exceptionally well in whatever the white man could teach. He learnt his job and the intricacies of application of law and logic so well that he could teach the Englishman the subtle tricks of the trade. Why was religious activities ignored now so much more than during the period of Muslim rule before it is the question. One reason is that modern science and machine age came to India with the British reign. Many things came to be known now than in the past. Yes, there was a knowledge explosion. That is good. But with more knowledge also come more aspirations and desires. Science led to applied science. There were more machines and more conveniences and luxury goods. Electricity, steam power, and petroleum came one by one. These conveniences and facilities were all meant for sensory satisfaction. You show some delights to the senses, they want more and more. Very similar to feeding the fire. Unnecessary things became essential and unavoidable. Man was trapped in a vicious cycle as never before, Brahmin included. With the Englishman and modern education also came another evil. The so called modern education brought with it so much emphasis on reasoning, logic, and objective knowledge that religion based on faith and subjective experience came to be declared as blind benefits and looked down upon. The Brahmin was foremost in this too. He who had not forsaken his personal dharma, even during the Muslim rule, now turned in the opposite direction. He started doing one better than the Westerners in dress, drinking, dancing, smoking, and partaking non vegetarian food. Britishers made use of the Brahmin in all types of professions. This worsened the situation. Till now, everybody had the profession, uncaring or worrying about what one should do for a livelihood. Now, looking at the Brahmin, forsaking his traditional role, everyone felt free to leave their own and landed in jobs in banks, railways, and bureaucracy. With the increased influx of more and more machines for all sorts of jobs, many craftsmen found their livelihood being threatened. They also had to look for employment. Instead of assured traditional employment, people had to fend for a job first and compete for that. That was unheard of ever in the past. Once there is a competition, it brings in its wake all the other ills of jealousy, heartburn, hatred, intolerance, and conflict. In addition, as I said before, the Brahmin with superior brain power, being heir to the pedal power momentum of his forefathers, had an edge. So, despite being a smaller part of the population, he could grab a lion's share of the jobs as doctors, engineers, lawyers, lecturers, and Indian civil service, right down to district and taluka level, and thereby also earn the jealousy of other castes. The Britishers were happy with the situation. On the one hand, they had the necessary qualified inputs for selection. Most importantly, they further benefited by finding the ideal atmosphere for their divide and rule policy. The Aryan Dravidian race theory was expounded during this time. This was a deliberately misleading fabrication, or in one word, a canard. People who were like the children of one womb became alienated among themselves. The Britishers better bettered their own expectations in sowing the seeds of sorrow for India to continue to suffer for decades to come in the future. To add fuel to the fire, the Brahmin did one more thing. Not only did he let go his Jati Dharma, but started proselytizing that the Varna Dharma was inhuman, exploitation, uncivil, and so on. Even that was tolerable. Every man is entitled to his opinions, but having expounded on the equality of all humans, he started behaving in a holier than thou attitude towards others. Even earlier, there was no physical interaction with other castes, but he was justified in doing so then. There had to be different work environment for reasons of the work, job, food, etc. We cannot have the same environment for all sorts of activities. If the place where the negative film is developed is required to be dark, the film should be first clicked in bright light, if need be with a flashlight, isn't it? The person serving food should be spotlessly clean, while the mechanic may wear soiled overalls. But it does not mean that the food server is in any way superior to the mechanic. Because the Brahmin was required to avoid non vegetarian food, we cannot and should not deny it to the soldier. It does not mean any superiority or inferiority. But if they sit down together and eat food, there should be avoidable temptations. Once you cross the threshold, once one could be driven to extremes. So each caste had their ways clearly defined. But on the name of equality, when we start mixing physically, it leads to a state of confusion confounded. That is why there was an agraharam or two in each village where the Brahmins were located. Then there were different streets for different workers of type, of trades and crafts and so on. For purposes of physical separation, all this finished with the village. But in the towns, traveling in crowded buses or trains, working in the same factory or in the same shift, eating in the same canteen, etc., became common. Brahmin gave up observing his rituals and became another common man, reneging on the duties he was meant to perform. Either he was like a trustee doing his rituals for everyone's sake, but no more. Not only had he become a competing participant and earned their disrespect and hate, he still continued to carry a sense of superiority inwardly. Having forsaken his own dharma, he was instrumental in making others to do so. Even when he was practicing his required dharma, he had no justice to claim superiority. He was to have the humbleness to feel that others are also doing their jobs, which were as important as his own. But by doing his duty, he could automatically evoke their respect and they held him in high esteem. Now Brahmin became the butt of every joke and ridicule. From a position of high esteem, he quickly came down. I am very convinced in my opinion that Brahmin is the main reason for the collapse of the system. Some people give some explanations. The Brahmin needed all the 24 hours of a day for doing his duties. Throughout his life, he was to spend all his time in chanting Veda mantras, doing Sandhya Vandanam, Brahma Yajna, Puja, Tapas, maintaining strict discipline in terms of restrictions on cleanliness of dress, physical being, and diet, continue his self studies lifelong and teach the next generations so as to ensure the continuity of nurturing Vedas and Brahminhood. Where was he to go for livelihood and sustenance? If he goes for earning, his lifetime mission will suffer. His main job cannot be done part time. The intensity in his Brahmin like activities will suffer. Then, like medication without dieting, the effectiveness of his mantras will dissipate. In the bargain, the society and in turn the world will not get the salutary divine vibrations. Because of this above logic, in Shastras itself, Brahmin was permitted to beg, so as to prevent the Brahmin from wasting his time and energy in begging. The kings in the past made it a point to take care of the Brahmin community with various kinds of donations, such as land, houses, cattle, and gold. Here, too, the Brahmin was required to refrain from accepting all that was gifted. He was to constantly guard against greed and sycophancy. Accepting all the gifts could have taken him down the path of indulgence and becoming so indebted to the donor that he would have had to interpret the Shastras conveniently, flexibly, thereby affecting the integrity of his professional dharma. Keeping all this order, keeping all this under consideration, as per dharma, he was required to accept only the minimum unavoidable essential least, so they lived under the care of the rulers. One of the explanations put forth for Brahmin's deviation from his avowed path is like this. After the arrival of the Britishers, there were no kingly donations. Brahmins were compelled to go for English education and governmental jobs by the force of economic prevalent circumstances. so they are not to be blamed for their looking for a livelihood. There may be some truth in this argument, but total justification is not there. Before the Britishers, there was the Mughal Empire, followed by rule by many sultans. Though some went to work in the darbar of these rulers, did not people survive without kingly privileges? Did they not continue to preserve with their duties as a Brahmin? The desertion of Agraharam, destruction of village life, the emptying of Veda schools, etc., have all happened in the recent past only, of about 150 years or so. So, what is the logic? The logic is like this: it is not only the Hindu kings who looked after the Brahmins. All the castes in the Hindu society were interested in seeing to it that Veda Dharmam should not be permitted to dissipate, that the Brahmin community should not suffer due to lack of care, and so have contributed immensely, wholeheartedly. Today, there are hundreds of Veda Pathshalas all over Tamil Nadu going unattended, literally. Who initially contributed the capital for them? Who sustained them with money over generations? Mostly Natikote Chettiars, Nagarathars, Komati Chettiars, Pannayars, and Vellalars. There is no end to such people's contributions for the temples and Brahmin communities in South India. They also believed that so as to retain the sanctity of the temples, it is essential to look after Vedas and Veda Pathshalas. So, they ensured that wherever there was a temple, a Veda Pathshala was also run and gave their wealth for that purpose ungrudgingly. So, my point is that had the Brahmins stuck to their duties of Veda Samrakshanam, that is, sustaining and protecting the learning and spread of the Vedas, instead of running after the mirage of a life of luxury, the whole Hindu society would have come forward to contribute their might. Even before the society had given him up, the Brahmin voluntarily deserted the Agraharam and village life and Veda Pathshalas for the life of luxury and ease made possible by modern science, newly arrived in India via the Britishers. He transgressed his dharma, by which he was required to accept only the minimum unavoidable essential least. So I do not agree to the argument that he let the dharma go by default only because of not even having enough to eat. No, the only explanation is that the Brahmin had surrendered to greed. Even after coming to the city, did he remain satisfied with the minimum? Had he done so, I could accept the above argument. What happened in reality? Even if he got 1,000 or two as salary in Madras, he was not happy. He had to opt for 3 or 4,000 at Delhi or Bombay. With that, whatever little bit of daily duties that were clinging to him in Madras also went up in thin air. Then he can get $4,000 in New York. He not only forgets that he is a Brahmin, but feels ashamed to say so. Perival says in Tamil, கண்டத்தை விட்டு கண்டம் போய் கண்டபடி வாழறானே, with a rhyming pun on the words கண்டத்தை and கண்டபடி, meaning how sad that this Brahmin community leaving their place of birth and going overseas to other continents are leading a life so recklessly that is so contrary to what they are required to do. Are they paying more in the army? I will join them, says the Brahmin. Does not matter even if I have to taste liquid and non-vegetarian food. So what we find is that for money the Brahmin has come to do anything and to go to any length. So I do not contribute to the opinion that Brahmin's downfall is due to the force of circumstances. I will go one step further. Let us assume that all other castes had given up their own dharma because of being lured away by the influx of science and machine age that came with the arrival of Britishers in India. Let us also assume that Aryan Dravidian divide tactic of the Britishers was responsible for the entire lot of non Brahmins deciding not to look after the Brahmins anymore. Let us assume also that the Brahmins were compelled by the circumstances to look for some sort of education and employment. Even then, I'm saying that they should have said, come what may, even if I have to die in the process, whatever I do or not do, I am not going to forsake my dharma. Anyhow, there is no meaning in saying what the earlier generation should have done. I am telling you all now the same thing. That is, even if the only alternative is to die, one should not give up Swadharma. We are anyhow going to die. But how did we live is more important. Having earned much wealth and having earned much more jealousy and hatred, and as people who forsake their self discipline, better than such living and death is to die of starvation doing one's duty. Let the world praise us or ridicule who is bothered about it. At the least, as long as we are not in competition with others, no one will be jealous of us. Let people laugh at us that we could not adjust to the changing world. Are they not laughing at us now? Instead of being the subject of ridicule without our dharma, let us be the subject of ridicule tightly holding on to our dharma. People are ready to sacrifice their life for the country or language. People are ready to give up their life by self immolation for even a dispute over land between two adjoining districts. They call it a principal stand, even though it may a worthless cause. Why could not the Brahmins stand up to the temptations that too for the noblest of causes, instead of opting for others' way of life and thereby gain some dubious benefits, they could have stood by their dharma and died of starvation. Bhagwan Sri Krishna says in the Gita, 3rd discourse, 35th shloka, that death is preferable in living up to one's duties rather than picking up the role of others. Quote, Swadharme Nidhanam Shreyaha. All the attraction of modern luxury consumer goods that came to available during the British period as related to the Mughal rule earlier can only be lame excuses and not reasons enough for the Brahmin's downfall. Brahmin's physical being was not meant for bodily pleasures at all, but for strictly performing the various rites of his profession for the welfare of humanity, so that body was not to be polluted by any materials that would increase the craving for sensory pleasures. This part of his dharma was utterly negated when he fell for ease and comfort. To defend one's own dharma, even in adverse conditions, was expected of him. That he opted otherwise is a sad blunder. As a result of it, we are now experiencing the hatred between brothers in this country. Not only have we brought the whole community down, but have created confusion in others too. Till the village life was relying on manpower, life was peaceful and pleasant. With the increased availability of all the modern facilities, the gap between possession and satisfaction has become unbridgeable. Life has become immensely complicated with a long waiting list for everything. Now, What is the remedy? Do you expect them to return to their old way of life? My answer is that whether I expect so or not, whether you think it is possible or not, I should insist that they must do so. I should not keep quiet, seeing our core dharma dwindling to null and void. For keeping quiet, you do not need a Jagat Guru. These religious and madams are meant only to make the impossible possible. We are there only to ask for that sort of an effort. There were people who sniggered, what? Struggle for independence from the Britishers through satyagraha, through non cooperation and other non violent means. You think you can force the hands of the Britishers to give up their colonial possessions? Forget it. The world has seen many things happening which were thought to be impossible earlier. My job is not to compromise on dharma and truth. Whether it happens or not is in your hands. All that I can do is to continue to put in your ears what is in our Shastras relentlessly, tirelessly, to tell you as to what are your duties as per the scriptures and insist that you carry it out despite the difficulties. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Shri Mahaperiva Sharanam.